Hi everyone, welcome back to the Pleasuring Shed. You join me again here for some float making. Thank you very much if you watched my last video, and I hope you liked it and have subscribed to the channel. I hope to make many more. On the last video we made the bamboo waggler, and I hope that gave you a little bit of inspiration to help you make floats for yourself. Don't have to be expensive and they don't have to be highly detailed. You can make them as basic or as decorative as you like. In today's video, what I'd like to do is show you how to make a goose quill, which hopefully you can see on the camera now. A goose quill, we're going to turn one of those into one of those. And again, it's a free material. You can find goose quills laying around near riversides, lakesides, as long as they are not attached to the bird. All right, we don't want them still attached. We want them laying on the floor where you can pick them up. Please do not chase geese or any other wildfowl around the lakes and rivers trying to take their feathers. You will get into a lot of trouble. So let's move on. Let's show you how we can turn the goose quill into a float. So once you've found your feather, we're going to need to prep it. Now, the feather itself, the feathery bits of it, we don't need at all. So we're going to use a really sharp knife, a razor blade or a scalpel or a really sharp craft knife. And we're just going to slice away these feathery bits on the side. So that's the first job. It does get a bit messy. And if you do have any sort of allergies or anything like that, it might be worth just wearing a face covering, a face mask, just to stop any dust and things going into your nose or into your mouth. So let's get on and strip this feather off. And so we're just left with the quill itself. So we've got our quill and we've got our blade. I've just replaced the blade on here now, so it's a really nice new sharp blade. The sharper the blade, the better it will be to cut the feathers. Now, my advice here is not to pull the feather off the quill itself, because you might damage the shaft of the quill there, and we don't want that. They're quite delicate, they're quite fragile. They are strong for floats, but if you kind of get holes in them, that's going to let the water in and it's not going to make a great float. So the sharper the blade, the better. And all we're going to do is just run the edge of the blade all the way along the feather. As you can see, it cuts through it really, really easily. Just taking it off as much as you can. Don't worry if there's any stubbly bits left on there, because we're going to take them off in just a minute. And same on the other side. Just running that blade all the way along, getting rid of all of the feathery bits. Don't worry about the end bits, because we're going to be cutting that off a bit shorter there in a moment. So what we're left with now is kind of quite a rough edge to the feathers, a bit like a stubble if you haven't shaved for a couple of days. So we're going to use the flat edge of the blade, the sharp bit, but the flat edge, and we're just going to run that along the length of the quill, and that's going to remove all of those stubbly bits. So you might just be able to hear that it's scraping along the edge of the quill there with the blade. And then I'm going to do the same on the other set of feather edges. There we are. If there are any longer bits, we can just come back the other way. You can see them all flicking off now. So what we're left with is a nice long quill. As I say, we're going to cut that end bit off in a minute, but we're left with that length of quill, which we'll tidy up with a bit of sandpaper and get that all nice and neat. So we've got our quill and we've stripped it of our feathers. Next job to do is cut it to length. Length is really entirely up to you. I'm going to go for about 15 to 18 centimeters. I think that's going to be a reasonable length. That's going to make a shot in weight probably of around 5 to 6 bb, maybe a little bit more. Good quill, good float, get to cast it quite a long way. You can also fish it close in as well. So we have here a selection of 3 different lengths. I would use the smaller one if I was fishing right in tight to the margins for smaller fish, roach, rudd, etc. And then the 2 larger floats just for getting out that little bit further. So let's focus on our quill that we're going to make today, and we'll see what the shotting weight is when we come to shot it up. But for now, let's get it cut to length. So I'm going to measure it up. So Let's move these out of the way. I'm going to measure it, and I'm going to cut it to about 18 centimeters, I think. So we'll just use our pencil to mark it. So I've just marked that at 18 centimeters. And just a pair of scissors, because it's quite soft material. So just a pair of scissors, and we're going to snip that off. Done. So that's our float. Let's make it look pretty. So we've got our quill cut to length. Like I said, 18 centimeters is the length that I've chosen to cut it to. What we need to do now is get it sanded, get it prepped. Now, when we're sanding it, it is going to make a little bit of dust. It might be an irritant if you've got allergies and things like that. So don't be afraid to wear a mask, especially if you're working in an enclosed space. So a little bit of sandpaper. I've just got an old bit of sandpaper here. It's 220 grit. So it's quite fine. It's not really fine, but it's a reasonable grit. What we want to do is just take the edges off of the quill. So we've got some rough edges. If I just run my fingernail along it, you might be able to hear that's a bit like stubble. So we want to get rid of those. And on this end of the quill, we've got like a waxy coating. This is the bit of the quill that sticks into the bird. And so I don't know what that's made of, but it's a bit of a waxy coating. So we want to get that sanded off, because it will help the paint stick to it if it's been sort of nibbed off. All right, so let's get sanding. So just rubbing away all of those rough edges. So we've got a nice smooth finish on the ends, down the length of the quill. Just keep feeling along it. What we don't want to do is take too much thickness off the quill shaft itself. Just keep running your fingers along it. If you can feel rough bits, just do a little bit more sanding. You can probably hear it as well in the sandpaper as you're rubbing it. It will get quieter as it gets smoother. So that's pretty good now. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the other end and get that waxy coating off. Don't press too hard on this end of the float, because they are quite thin. They're quite robust, but they're quite thin as well. So we don't want to put too much pressure on it. We certainly don't want to squash the quill where we might crack it, and that will then let water in and the float will be pretty much useless. So just taking off that waxy coating, it really doesn't take much effort at all. Again, just feeling it should have a nice matte feel to it. We don't want a shiny, glossy feel to it. And you can see, I don't know if you can pick that up on the camera, but it's definitely lost that shine. It's nice and matte now. So there we are. We've got a nice smooth quill to work with. Our next job is to put a little eyelet on the end. So now our quill is sanded. Just on the tip here, we're going to mount the eye for the line to go through. So what I need to do is just flatten that off into a bit of a point, and that will help us whip the eye on. So using my sanding block, I've got slightly rougher paper on here, to put a bit of pressure on with my finger and just rub it backwards and forwards. And what we're doing is making a bit of a chamfer on the end there, and we'll do that on both sides. That's good on one side, and then top it. It's almost square, the end of the quill here. It's almost square. So we're just going to do it on opposite sides. So we've done one side, now we turn it and we'll do the other. So there we are, let's just get that even. So what we've done, I don't know if you can see that on camera, we've just kind of made it into a bit of a point, and that will allow us to whip the eye on a little bit easier. So I'm also just going to take the edges off either side as well. Just a tiny bit. So there we are. So now we've got that chamfered end, and that's going to help us put the eyelet on. So that's what we'll do now. So where I flatten that edge down, what I want to do is just put a little split in there, because we're going to put the thread in there in just a moment. So again, with our sharp blade, be very, very careful with this. Make sure the blade's up the right way around. Many a times I've put my finger on the wrong side of the blade. It hurts, believe me. So we're just going to press down very gently, and it's very easy material to work with. It's almost like polystyrene. It's a very strange texture. So we put the split down the middle. We'll come back to that split in a minute when we start to put the thread in. But now what we need to do is get our safety pin. Hopefully you can see that there. And we're just going to cut the head of the safety pin off using a pair of side cutters. So here we've got an old pair of side cutters, my old faithfuls. So we're just going to snip the end off. Always just pop your finger over the end, otherwise it shoots off and it's lost forever. So just snipping off the end, and then what you're left with is the eyelet there, which is what we're going to whip on now. So before we start whipping, don't forget we're going to need our piece of thread. So I don't know if you can see that there. It's not thread really, it's fishing line. We made a loop and we made that in the last video to help us with our whipping. So if you want to know what the loop is for and how to make it, check out the previous video, Black Bottom Floats, the bamboo waggler. So let's put that to one side and let's get on with whipping our eye on. So to begin whipping, we are going to take our piece of thread. I've chosen a black thread on this occasion because nearly all of my floats start with a black whipping on the bottom of the floats, hence the name Black Bottom Floats. And we're going to place that thread into that little slit that we've made. I don't know if you can see that. We're going to place it into that little slit we've made. And then we're going to use a lighter to just burn off this tag end. So here's our lighter. Once the tag end is burnt down, just put your thumb or your finger on it, and just to put the little flame out. It won't hurt you, I promise. Just push down firmly on it. That will squash the thread. It will melt it. It will squash it onto the end of the quill there, and then it will stop the thread from being pulled out. So here we go. Just going to light that end, and it gets near the bottom, or it went out before I got there, and just squash that thread down. And now that's quite tight in there. That's not going anywhere, and that's going to help when we start whipping on the eye. We've got the thread attached, so hopefully you can see the eyelet there. We're going to place that over the end of the quill, just so, and then we're going to pinch that down in between our fingers, a bit fiddly. There we are, we've got the eyelet on the end there. Now I like to keep the whole of the eyelet, the ring of the eyelet there, right up tight against the butt of the quill, so there's no gaps there and it keeps it nice and strong. So when we start the whip, I'm going to pull the thread underneath and then over the top of the quill, and that's going to help me when I start twisting the quill. Then it's kind of a more natural way for me to do it. You can do it whatever way you want. This is the way I do it. So we start off by just bringing the thread round and over the top. Keep it fairly taut. We don't want that whipping too tight because we don't want to squash the quill or snap the quill. And once you've got 3 or 4 good whips over the top, you can relax your grip on the actual eyelet itself, the safety pin, and then give yourself a length of thread and slowly just start twisting the quill. And each time we twist the quill, we're moving up the length of the quill so that we're not whipping the thread over the top of another thread. We're laying it down by the side of each turn, if that makes sense. So we're going to keep twisting all the way down. Don't worry if there's a few little gaps to begin with. There always will be as you do this first layer. And then when we get to the bottom, to the eyelet, we're actually going to change the angle of it and start whipping back the other way, and that will cover up all those little gaps. Again, this is the way I do it. There's lots of other ways of doing it, I'm sure. But this one's working for me. I don't use any kind of machines or anything like that. As you see me doing it now, this is the way I do all of my floats. All of the ones that I sell on eBay. Don't forget to check out my eBay page. So every float that you see on eBay that I've made goes through this process. So no fancy machines or anything like that. It's all handmade. So we keep going, and you can see we're starting to whip back up the other way now. We're almost over the top that we've pre-whipped. There we are. Now we are beginning to get to the end of the safety pins, sort of the legs of it, if you like. Now those little edges there, the little legs that stick out, again, as I said before in the previous videos, they can be a little bit sharp. So when you do get right to the ends and you're about to sort of step off those little leg pieces, just loosen the tightness of the thread so that they don't cut against the little feet of the safety pin. There we are. We've just dropped off the edge now. Make sure that's all nice and tight. Just use your thumbnail just to push it all up and squash it all. And there we are. So we're off the end now, and it's all just plain sailing and just laying down each thread next to the thread previous to it, so you get a nice even lay of whipping. And when you can go as far up the shaft as you want to, you can do the whole thing. Might take you a few hours, but you could do the whole thing if you wanted to. I'm going to do about 0.5 centimetre. Now, what we need to do now is put our little bit of fishing line in there that we made the loop from, and we can learn how to just tie that off. So I've got my little bit of fishing line which I made into the loop. You saw that in the previous video. So I'm going to place that underneath the thread, and I'm going to just pinch it down under my thumb here. Have to be a quick bit sort of dexterous for this. So now I am going to just slide that under my index finger, but without lifting the pressure on it. So it's clamped between my thumb and index finger now, with the thread laying over the top. So what I'm going to do now is I can take up the pressure now on the thread that I'm pulling. So that means I can let my index finger go, and that holds that loop in place. And I'm just going to put another, I'm going to do another 4 turns on that. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That should be enough. You can do more if you want, but it's not really necessary. I wouldn't do too many less. 3 is okay. 2, you're not going to get a tight grip with the thread that's over the top. So keeping it nice and taut again, pressure on that index finger. Don't let go of that index finger. And we're going to use a pair of scissors now to just snip off the thread. And what we're left with is a tag end. Now that tag end is going to pass through the loop. So we're just going through the loop there, pull it, and then the bottom end of your loop, the fishing line loop, you're going to grab hold of that. That's going to pull down, and what it's going to do is pull the tag end of thread underneath those 4 wraps that we've just done. So let's pull it through, line out of the way. There we are. So the loop has come out. We'll put that out of the way, and we can see now that we've got this little tag end. You can see that. So what we need to do is just snip off the tag end and keep it nice and neat. Now, rather than use a pair of scissors on that, I like to use even my sharp knife again. So you can see I've just got a little bit of tension on the thread. Place the knife underneath. Hopefully you can see that, and then just let the blade do the work. And there we are. We're done. That's the eyelet whipped on. Now, you could leave it there if you wanted to. That's going to be fine. We'll put a bit of varnish on that just to glue it in place, but that's fine as it is at the moment. What I like to do is just add a little bit of decorative whipping. So let's do that next. So I've chosen a red thread now to do a bit of decorative whipping. I put my glasses on as well because my eyes are getting bad. So slightly different start. With this one, what we're going to do is lay the thread along the length of the quill, and if you can see that, I'm just going to pinch it there under my thumb. Okay, and then, like I said before, we're going to go around, starting from going underneath and then over the top. So we're going to bring that round, and then what we'll end up doing is wrapping the threads over the top of that little strand that we were holding with our thumb. So once we've done that 2 or 3 times, it should hold itself in place. Just make sure that's all squashed up nice and neat. And you can see now that I can put a little bit of pressure on that, pulling it taut again. And that's holding in place without any glue or anything like that. It's basically tightened on itself. So what I want to do now is just snip off this little tag end. So again, I'm going to use my really sharp knife a razor blade or something like that would be good here, but do be careful. Just going to snip off that tag end. There it goes. And I'm going to continue whipping. So just slowly rotating the quill. And what I want to do now is make a nice spiral effect. So all I do is change the angle of the thread and start to wind. And you can see that it begins to make a spiral as it goes up the shaft of the quill. You can keep the spiral as tight or as wide as you want. You can practice and play with lots of different decorative styles. Perhaps I'll do a video one day of showing you different techniques and different styles that I use. Once you think you've come up the shaft as far as you want, then we can straighten it off again. And we're going to create another little bar of red whipping to match the one at the bottom that we've already done. Now bear in mind, we've got to use our fishing line loop and do a few more whips after that. So I don't want to make it too thick. So I'm going to stop there and clamp it with my index finger. We need to get our loop again. There we are, we're getting our loop, and we're going to place that again underneath the thread. Hold it under your thumb, squash it under your index finger so that's held in place. And then with the thread again, you can let go of your index finger and we can just begin to whip again over the top. So we're going to do 4, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, we're going to clamp it with our index finger again so I can let go of the tension on the thread. We're going to snip that with our scissors. And this tag end is going to pass through the eye of the loop. Here we are, let's pull that through. And then the bottom end of the loop is pulled then, bringing the loop underneath the whipping that we've just done, pulling that tag end through. And again, that's going to secure it and lock it in place. No need for any glue. That's quite nice and secure. Then with our nice sharp blade, again, just put a little bit of tension on that tag end of thread. Put the blade right near the bottom and just let the blade slide across the thread, and it cuts it so easily. That's why it's really important to have that really sharp knife. If you don't have the sharp knife, what can happen is it makes the thread cut really badly and you end up with lots of little strands. So that really sharp knife is really helpful. So there we are. We have a nice bit of decorative whipping on the end there now. What I'm going to do is just add a little black bar at the top so it matches. So we've got red, black, red. No, we haven't. We've got black, red, black. All right, so we got a little black bar at the top there. So I'm going to do that now, and I'll show you that when I've finished. The whipping is done. Got the little black band on there just to finish it off. So that makes it all nice and neat. It's a nice, neat pattern. So what I want to do now is put a little coat of varnish on it just to seal it, and it holds it in place. And then when I'm handling the float around, it doesn't let the threads come undone and undo all the whipping that we've done so far. So I like to use Rustin's quick drying varnish. This is an outdoor varnish. It's a gloss finish, but that's not going to be the end look of the float. I will be using a satin coat for the yacht varnish, which we put over the top. But this is a really good varnish because it dries really quickly. It seals it off, and then we can handle the float much more freely. So I'm going to do that now. So I've got my varnish open. I'm just going to give it a little coat. Here we go. So just dip the brush. We don't need very much. I'm just going to give it a quick coat. Really don't have to be very careful with it. Just give it a good smother all over. I'm not going to go too far up the quill. All I need to do is cover the thread. There we are, done. I've left that varnish to go off now, and you can tell it's gone dry because the varnish goes clear. When you put the varnish on, it's a little bit sort of cloudy and white and sort of milky colour, but as it dries, it goes nice and clear. So that's all dried now. So what I'm going to do is move to the other end of the float, the tip end, and we're going to decide how long we want our tip colour to be. And then we're going to give that a base coat of white using white modelling paint. I'll show you what I'm going to use in just a moment. But first of all, we need to measure how long of a tip we want. I don't mind sort of tip length. It's your choice. You can do, maybe just 1 centimetre if you want to pick the float right down. Personally, I like to have a slightly longer tip, and then I'm going to put 2 colours on it. I'll use the red and the yellow, or yellow and red, or orange, depending on the design that I'm doing. So I'm going to measure that, and I'm going to make it about 5 centimetres long. So that's what I'll do. So I'll find my ruler. Here we go. And I'm just going to place the quill at 5 centimetres and then put a little mark with my pencil just there. Hopefully you can see that. And then this part of it, I'm going to use a white enamel paint just to put a base coat on. The base coat will really pop the brightness of the yellow when we put that on. So let's get that white base coat on now. Got the quill measured, and I'm going to use just a tin of matte white modelling paint. This is a Revel enamel. Humbrol do one. I'm sure there are other companies that do enamels as well, but this is the one I like to use. So I'm just going to dip my paintbrush in the paint and just paint the end of the quill. You can see it's going really nice and white with the paint, and that's going to give us a good base for putting on our fluorescent colours. Just keep painting the whole thing nice and white. Quite liberal with the paint. It dries quite nicely, so be quite liberal with it. What we don't want is gaps, because the gaps will show up when we start putting the yellow on. So there we are. It's all nice and white now. We're just going to hang that up to dry. That will take a couple of hours to dry now. The enamel paints do take quite a while. So hang that up to dry, and we'll come back to it in just a minute. So the white's dry now. I did actually put a second coat on there. So there's 2 coats of white on there just to give it a bit of extra thickness. And what I'm going to do now is give it a coat of the high-vis yellow. So again, I'm using the Revel enamel paint. The code for this one is SM312. So I think SM stands for Silk Matte. And I'm going to use that just to paint the tip. So I'm going to paint the whole tip with this colour, and that's going to be my base coat. And then over the top of that, I'll use a red and an orange just to give it a bit of colour. Now, how you place the orange on here is entirely up to you. You can have a yellow tip with an orange base, or you can have a yellow base. Oh, I just did that. That's the right way around, wasn't it? Or you can have a yellow base with an orange tip. So again, good liberal coat of the yellow paint, the high-vis yellow. So this paint is a little bit opaque. So if there are dark areas underneath in the white, it will show through. So really give a good coating of the white paint, and then you'll get a nice coating of the yellow. So that's all on there now. I'll let that dry off, and I will give that a second coat as well, just to make sure. So we'll leave that one to dry. Rather than me sitting here waiting for all that paint to dry, here's one I prepared earlier in true Blue Peter style. Right, so what I want to do now is make sure that I've got different colours on here. So I'm going to measure a certain length, make a little pencil mark, and I'm going to paint the tip of my float red, and I'm going to leave the base of my float yellow. So find my pencil, I've got my ruler ready. So it was 5 centimetres that I measured. So I'm going to do it at 2 centimetres, just there. So this part of the float will be red, and this part of the float will be yellow. So let's get it painted red. So move that out of the way. So the paint I'm using for this one is another Revel enamel. This is satin matte, or silk matte rather, a silk matte SM332. So it's a nice bright high-vis red. So let's get that painted on. Again, quite liberal with the paint, going straight over the top of the yellow. This will probably need 2 coats again. So let's get that all painted up. And keep your strokes nice and even, so you get good coverage. Making sure that's even all the way around. We want a reasonably straight edge. It doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to whip over that with a bit of thread. So if your join where the red meets the yellow is a little bit messy, don't panic too much, because we're going to whip over the top of that with a bit more decorative whipping, and that will cover up that join. So there we are. So we've got a coating of the red on there. I am going to add a second coat of the red just to make sure it's nice and bright. So I've got another one already set up and ready, so let's move on to that. So I've left that float to dry overnight, and the reason I've left it for a few hours because I want these colours to really harden off. If I was to let it go surface dry, and when I started putting the whipping on, the actual thread will cut through the soft paint, and it will kind of ooze out either side of the threads, and it will start to look like a mess. So really let that top coat, that final coat of coloured paint there, really go off hard. 8-10 hours, overnight, 24 hours, whatever, but just really let that go hard. So I'm going to start with the whipping now. So I'm chosen a black thread. You could leave the float like that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You've got the two different bands of colour. There's quite a difference between the two colours. The only reason I'm going to put a bit of black whipping on there is just purely decoration and for the aesthetics of the float. It's my float and I want it to look nice. But like I say, if you want it to look just like that, it works. It will catch you fish. So let's get whipping again. So I'm going to place the thread just under my thumb, right on the edge of where the red meets the yellow. I want to start my whipping very slightly in the red area, and then I'm going to whip down into the yellow area, and that will cover that messy join between the two different colours. I could have used a piece of masking tape to make that nice and neat, but there's no point as I'm going to whip over the top. So it's clamped under my thumb. Remember, I'm going to whip underneath first of all, around over the top, just laying that down, and eventually as I keep turning it, it's going to cover that little bit of thread that I've got clamped under my thumb. And once I've got 2 or 3 or 4 turns of that, I can let go of the thread under my thumb, and that's held in place now with the tension of the thread. Remember, don't let go of the tension of the thread because you'll just let the thread unwind. So we're going to carry on whipping round. Now you can see here, here's a little point, look. I've just missed it. Look, you can just see a tiny bit of yellow. Don't panic, we don't have to start again. What we can do is just use our thumbnail and just push the threads up onto the red bit a little bit more. And that's going to cover that little yellow area. So there we are, you can see that it's gone now, and I can continue whipping round. I'm going to clamp it under my index finger, and I can release the main thread now because I want to snip off this little tag end. So again, using that really sharp knife, right on the edge here, just put your blade on there, just snip it off, and you can see it just fell off, leaving a tiny little stump of thread there, but that's fine because we're going to whip over the top of that. So keep spinning the quill. You don't want to make the band too thick, and what I'm going to do now is change the angle so we get that nice spiral effect again coming through the yellow. And when we get to the bottom of the yellow, we straighten up, and we're going to create another thicker band on the end, getting a nice straight edge, whipping round. And remember, we've got to put our loop of fishing line under there, so we don't want the band to be too thick. I want it to really match the band at the top, so it gives it a little bit of symmetry and a little bit of balance. So I think that's about right for now. Clamp it under your index finger, get your little loop of fishing line, place it underneath your thread, and clamp it under your thumb, pinch it in, and carry on whipping. So we're going to do another 3 or 4 whips. 1, 2, I think 3 will be right this time, and then it will be about the same thickness, so that you can see the 2 bands are about the same thickness there. So we've done 3 whips. I'm going to snip off the excess with a pair of scissors. It says the scissors work. And we're going to tuck the tag end through the loop. Once it's through the loop, we'll pull the bottom end of our loop through, and pulling the loop through underneath the threads that we've just whipped. There we are, a little wiggle, and it's done. So what we're left with now is that tag end, which we're going to snip off with our knife. So nice even whip, covering the 2 ends, covering the messy bits of the paint. It's a nice neat finish. So take your sharp blade again and just slice through that tag end, letting the blade do the work. There we are. And that's it. Done. So that we've got our nice decorative float now. Clear definition between the 2 colours, making that really nice and neat. So what I'm going to do now is give that a really good coat of that clear Rustin's varnish again, the quick drying varnish. That's going to seal that all in before we put on a final top coat of yacht varnish. The whipping's done. What I want to do now is just put another coat of quick drying outdoor varnish on it. That seals off this bit of whipping here. We've sealed off the whipping at the bottom, but we're just going to give the whole thing a quick going over with the quick drying varnish. So here we go. Nice liberal amount, and just paint away. As you can see, it goes on this milky colour, but it will dry nice and clear. And just painting the whole of the quill now. Obviously not the bit where you're holding, because your fingers will get sticky. But we already painted that end at the beginning when we sealed off those threads. So there we are, nice and quick, easy to do. And that's it, job done. I'm going to hang that up to dry now, and then once that's dried, we can look at getting the shotting weight right, getting it sitting in the water nicely. I've let the varnish go off now, and the varnish has gone nice and dry. Again, I left this overnight because I want it to be really dry for when I write on it with the Sharpie. What we need to do now is get the float to sit in the water. So here's our tube of water. It's an old pasta jar, plastic pasta jar. I'm going to use my shots to get the float to sit. Now, personally, again, this is my personal choice. I like my float to sit on that top line there. If it sits on the top line, if I get a lift bite, I get to see the yellow, and there's just that little bit more bite indication. Some people like to pip it right down. Some people like to have the whole thing showing. But for me, I'm going to try and get the shot so that it sits there on the waterline. Let's get some shot on it. I'm going to start off with some BBs. So I've got a little bit of fishing line just here, and I've got 3 BB on it already. I think this is probably going to be 3 to 4 BB, going on the size and the thickness of the float. So let's see. So we'll just thread that through the eye. And then I'm going to use 1 more BB shot just to lock it on. So just locking that on. So that's a total so far of 4 BB on there. So let's see what happens in the water. I've got a feeling that might be a bit heavy, but let's find out. Well, 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 would you look at that? That is absolutely perfect. That's sitting smack on the line. I don't know if you can see that through the jar, side of the jar there, but that is sitting just on the line. Absolutely perfect. So that was a good guess. Right, well, that's that bit done. So I can write on there now 4 BB. I'll dry it off first, but I'll write on there with my Sharpie 4 BB. Then I know when I want to change my float on the riverside or the bankside, I can tell what to shot it at and get the right shot on the line nice and quickly because it's written on the side of the float. So that's what I'm going to do now. So let's get a bit of tissue and let's dry off the float. And then with our Sharpie, I've got a thin tipped Sharpie here. I'm just going to write on there 4 BB. Typical, pen's not working. That's better. Okay, so there we are. See on there, 4BB. Now, because this is a black bottom float, can't have it without the logo on it. So just along here, I'm going to put black bottom floats. There we are. So we know it's one of mine. You can write anything you like on yours, but for me, black bottom floats every time. So that's that. That's done. So what I'm going to do now is give that a coat of yacht varnish. And that's going to seal that all off and make it ready to use. So let's do that now. Once I had written on the black bottom floats logo and the shotting weight, I then did give the whole float another coat of the Rustin's quick drying varnish, just to seal off the logo there and the shotting weight. So what I'm going to do now is use the yacht varnish, and this time I'm using a satin yacht varnish finish. Not too keen on the gloss personally. Again, it's personal preference. If you like gloss, great. If you don't, prefer the satin. It gives it a slightly more matte look. So yeah, so let's get that painting on that. So I'm going to start at the eyelet end. Again, just dipping the brush in and just painting away. What we want it to do is keep the coat of the varnish quite even, not too thick, because when we hang it up, we don't want the varnish to run and create little drips and running drips in the finish, because it won't look very nice and they won't dry out either. Yeah, so we're going to start off at the tip on the eyelet end, and then we're going to brush all the way through. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to paint the whole of the float in one go, because I need to be able to hold it. So I'm going to have an end. So I'm going to varnish up to this bottom band here, and then I'm going to leave the bottom end and varnish that probably tomorrow, because this varnish really does take quite a long time to dry. Talking, just to be touch dry, you're talking 8 to 10 hours, and recoatable. Well, all the information will be on the tin, but recoatable probably in, I don't know, 16 to 18 hours, something like that. A nice thin, even coat all the way over the float. Again, I'm stopping at that band, just so I know where to start when I start varnishing again. It doesn't matter if you overlap. I'll probably put 2 coats of varnish on anyway. So it goes on quite shiny and looks quite glossy, but actually once it's dried, it will go a nice satin matte look. So there we are. So that's as much as I can do right now. So I'm going to get that hanged up. I'm going to hang that up and leave that to dry, and I'll come back to that tomorrow. So the float is finished. Okay, so what I did was put 2 coats of varnish on the whole thing, and I've left that to dry. Now with the yacht varnish, it really does take probably a good 2 weeks for the varnish to fully harden, maybe longer, depending on the temperature of the room that you're in. I'm in my shed, which isn't very well insulated, and we're coming into autumn now, so the temperature's dropping, so that drying time will take a bit longer. During the summer months, when it's nice and hot in here, sometimes too hot, that varnish will dry off really quite quickly. But to get it usable, to be able to keep it in the water for long periods of time, it really needs a good 2, maybe even 3 weeks to really fully harden. So I did this float quite a while ago, and the varnish has really gone off quite nicely now, and it's ready to take down to the lake. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to head down to the lake for a nice bit of fishing. See you there. Hi everyone, welcome to the lakeside. We've left the pleasuring shed and we're going to test out our Goose Quill float. So this is the one we made in the shed. If you remember, we shotted it to 4BB, so Let's take a look at how I've rigged that up on my line, and then we'll take a look at the fishing tackle that I'm using, the rod and reel. So I've used 2 rubber float stops either side of the float there, and that's connected me onto the line, and that just keeps the float from moving up and down the line. I've left a little gap between the 2 stops because I want the float to move a little bit. You don't want the float pinched right up tight like that, okay, because it does affect the way the float moves through the water. So just leave a little gap, I don't know, a centimetre, something like that, ½ an inch there. And then down the line, we know it's 4 BB, so I've got 3 of those BB bulk shotted just underneath the float, about 6 to 8 inches below the float. And then I've got a nice clear run then down all the way down to a single shot. Sorry, it's all a bit fingers and thumbs. A single shot just there, which is about 8 inches from the hook. Now the hook, I've gone for quite a large hook because I'm going to be fishing with worms. Now the weather's turned, it's very chilly this morning. It's a bright November morning. And I'm thinking more natural baits rather than ham or pellet. So I'm going to go for a nice fat juicy worm. So I've gone for quite a large hook. That's a size, well actually it's a grips size 12. But the grips hooks do come up quite large. So it's more like a size 10. So there we are. So I'm going to get a hook on that, I'm going to get a worm on that hook in a minute. So that's the setup. Nice and simple as we always are. So there we go. Let's take a look at the rod and reel now. I'm going old school today. So I have got a Edgar Seeley Octafloat Deluxe split cane rod. Again, this is something that I restored in the pleasuring shed. I bought this rod on eBay. It was cheap. It was in quite poor condition. Most of the eyes were missing, but the cane itself was in pretty good condition. So I've taken that all back, re-whipped it. Got a bit garish with the whipping on the green, but there we are. I quite like it. So that's all good. And yeah, just cleaned up the cork handle and it's all come up really nicely. So I'm really pleased with that. And then the reel I'm using, this is new. This is a first time out for me. Again, I bought this on eBay. I bought a pair of these for not a lot of money. I got a real bargain. So this is a J.W. Young's Trudex. I've checked the plate at the back and it's from the 7th 63. So what's that? That's July 1963. So there we are. So it's exactly 60 years old, almost just over 60 years old. So yeah, lovely. It's got a line guard on it. Now I like a line guard just because it makes the winding of the line back onto the reel a little bit easier and you don't get quite so many tangles and knots. So that's the setup. The rod is about 11 foot. It probably was longer, but it's about 11 foot now. I think the tip section's lost a little bit on the end. And I'm fishing with 6-pound line, and that's straight through to the hook. I haven't got a hook link on the bottom because I'm only fishing 6-pound line. I'm not targeting big fish today. I'm going to be targeting roach, perch, maybe some bream if they're in here. And you never know, Mr. Carp might come along and give us a bit of fun as well. So let's get fishing and see how we get on. So my worm's on. Let's get it out there. Here we go. Just going to bring it in under the bush a little. Pick up some slack. And then just pop the rod down. Sit back. Going to get a pinch of maggots. Just half a dozen or so. And just throw it in over the top of the float. Now my float's sitting a little bit high. I think I'm slightly over depth, but that's okay because we're fishing on the bottom. So we'll keep an eye on it. Oh, there's the first little indication. That's good. My hand's poised on my reel, rod and reel. So just getting ready. Because it's a worm, I'm just going to let them take it right under. No, not this time. Never mind. Let's try that again. There we go. Right, let's try that. And go with another little pinch of maggots. Absolutely beautiful morning. The sun is just coming over the trees opposite. It's a mist off the water. Absolutely glass still it is. Beautiful. Oh, we're in. Lovely. That's not a bad one. Lovely bend in the rod. Not a monster. We haven't landed it yet. Another little fat carp. Let's get me landing there. Nothing like fighting a carp on a split cane rod. Come on. There we go. Beautiful. And we're in. Right. Let's get on the mat and take a look. Here we are, and we're out. So, lovely little mirror carp. Probably about 2.5 pounds, 3 pounds maybe. Come on, settle down. Settle down. It's not going to behave itself for camera, is it? Trust me, it's a nice fish. Let's put it back. And away. So, there we are, the goose quill. It works. Fantastic. Let's see if we can catch another one. So things have gone a little bit slow right now. I'm still on the worm, but I think what I'm going to do is drop it down a hook size, go down to a size 16, get some maggots on, see if we can pick up some of the smaller fish. There'll be loads of perch in there, might be some roach. Never know, might even get a rudd as well. So join me in a minute once I've changed my hook size down. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a bit funny about my maggots and how I put them on. I have to put them on in a special order. If I'm using 4 maggots, which I am at the minute, I have to go on red, white, red, white. It can't be red, 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 white, or red, white, red, red. It's got to be even. Fishermen have lots of these stupid traditions and superstitions. A minute. Right, there we go. Let's let that settle. Bit of a slack. Throw a little pinch in over the top. And let's see what happens. And straight away I can see the float is just beginning to bobble around, which means there's probably some small fish just nibbling around at that loose feed, just knocking the line. And so fingers crossed, any second we should get a clear indication on the float. Yes, 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 yes. Hey, what we got here? Oh, it's a monster. It's a true lake monster. Look at that. And he has properly scoffed it. Goodness me. I'm going to need the disgorger for that one. Right, where is it? Here it is. Oh, perch. Love them and hate them. Oh, there we go. So, look at that. Look, he's got his fin up and everything. What a true lake monster. Now he's going to go off to be, I don't know what he's going to be, but yeah, thank you. And away. Well, there you are. It just shows you how sensitive these goose quills are. To catch a tiny little perch like that on such a big float really shows how effective they are. So goose quills all the way. Good job. One more cast. Right, fish on. Fish on. Ooh. This is a bit better. Certainly not one of those little perch. I must say, this little reel is absolutely fantastic. And it looks like a little carp. Come on. In you come. Oh, bring up a lovely scrap. Look at that. What a cracking fish. Lovely. And in the net. Beautiful. Wow, that's a lump. Let's get it on the mat and have a look. Oh, behave yourself now. Wow, what a beauty. Has the hook come out? There's my line. Oh, there we are. Look at that. Even the hook's come out. The joy of barbless hooks. Right, let's see if the camera wants to see you. There we are. Look at that. Whoop. Come on. Right, let's try a bit of tonic immobility. Now, I learnt this from the master that is Graham Pullen of TA Fishing. Hold the fish upside down. He calls it tonic immobility. And you can see how instantly they go calm. Let's see if we can get them the right way up, see what happens. There we are. What an absolute cracker. Let's get it back. And away. Thank you very much. So there we are. We've had success on the Goose Quill. What a fantastic day. I'm going to carry on, maybe just one more cast, and then I'll see you back in the pleasuring shed. See you soon. That was a great success. Thank you for joining me down at the lake. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Don't forget, when you're making your floats, you can design them any way you want. You don't have to copy my designs. Use your imagination. Colour of the whipping is your choice. The colour of the tips is your choice. Just let your imagination run wild. Don't forget, you can check out my Instagram account. I do have an Instagram account, and that is at Black Bottom Floats. You can search for that, and hopefully you can follow me on there. I've also got my eBay page as well, which you can purchase some of the floats. If you like what you see, you can come and buy some of your own. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you've liked what you've seen, hit the little like button, subscribe, and if you click on the notification bell, if and we put up or when we put up new videos, you'll be notified. And lastly, don't forget to leave a comment if you want to about anything you want me to do in the future with regards to making floats. If there was a particular type of float that you want me to make, or a particular part of the float that you want me to go into more detail about, just let me know in the comments, and hopefully in the future I can make videos to help you. In the next video, what I'd like to do is go through and restore some floats rather than make floats that are from scratch. So I've been rummaging around in some of my old tackle boxes, and I've found some pretty manky old porcupine quills. So hopefully you can see these. They don't even have eyes on the bottom. They were usually fixed on with little rubber bands, but all the tips are cracking off and flaking, and they just look a bit old and tatty. So we're going to breathe some new life into these old porcupine quills. I don't know if you've got an old grandparent or something like that used to go fishing and has got an old box of tackle laying around and it's got a load of old crusty old floats in it. Have a rummage, see what you can find, and let's see if we can restore them and get them back out in the water for a bit more of a life. Right, I'll see you again in the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you soon.